Today is Tuesday, April 26, 2022. It's 8:37 a.m. and we're resuming our work on H697, an act relating to eligibility of reserved forest land for enrollment in the use value appraisal program. So I want to thank people that have continued to work on this since our last committee work, and ask council to join us at the table. We have 2 amendments to look at, maybe more, and since we reviewed the bill as a whole already, if you could distribute the 2 amendments. I think if we start with the one I gave you last week, and then we'll go on to what. We'll look at them as a group, sort it out. We want to amend, and I hope come to a conclusion and vote.
I don't actually have a copy of yours. I thought I did, but I don't.
Okay.
I have a copy, but I only have one.
How about if we do Senator Weston's first? And can you print here?
But I haven't in my email.
Oh, yeah.
For some reason it didn't come. If I should have seen it said to me.
We got all
Does anybody have an Apple computer?
yeah, I do, but it's I can't do it.
Want to use mine? Your amendment's up on our website.
So this is the Westman one.
This is Westman.
So we all have that.
No,
So while
if
we're
it's on the
going through
website,
that,
then I'll be able to follow. It's whether or
I
not.
can't keep having.
So
no, a
the
physical copy. If someone could take a physical copy and just run copy.
Senator Bray amendment is online, according to Jamie. Jamie, what day was that?
Oh, the 20th.
It's also very short.
Yes, that I posted.
On that
I posted that earlier.
committee,
Pardon me?
is it on the committee website?
Yes.
I don't know what date.
Maybe last Friday. And we're back.
Tuesday, April 26th.
So Judy's getting us hard copies of the amendment, and let's start with Senator Weston.
Okay, so Senator Weston proposes 2 amendments. The first is in the definition of ecologically significant treatment area. It's really criteria for what could be considered an ecologically significant treatment area based on parcel size. You will see on page 1, line 15 through 18. On parcels of up to 100 acres, 30% of the parcel acre shall be composed of significant and sensitive conditions. And on parcels of 100 acres or more, 50% of the parcel acre shall be composed of significant and sensitive conditions. I'll pause there in case anybody wants to ask a question or say.
So current law is 30%, but there's no acreage threshold.
The current proposal is for 30% of the parcel areas to be significant or sensitive areas.
Right. Okay, so Estes currently up, there's no percentage threshold on Estes currently, 20?
So on a parcel of forest land that's managed forest land, if you want to qualify as an ESTA, it's pretty much default approved up to 20% of the parcel, but the commissioner can approve over 20% based on site conditions.
And the minimum of 20 acres.
And there has to be a minimum of 20 acres of managed forest land on the parcel.
So conceivably, you could come in with, besides the 20 acres, 20%, and this moves that threshold up to 30%.
So this is a reserved forest land, right? No, I probably put it in the wrong. I put it in the wrong definition. It's my fault. It should be on the definition of reserve forest land, not ecologically significant treatment area.
Okay, that's right. They all left out there. Okay, so if it were reserved forest land, then this is the threshold for enrollment in reserve.
Are you currently in committee? Are you currently in committee?
Yeah. I can hand this.
Understood.
And get started this afternoon.
That's all right.
I'll come back out.
Okay, thank you.
So that's my bad. It should say reserve forest land, have that definition.
Okay,
And then the second amendment refers to when someone wants to withdraw reserve forest land from use value appraisal. The commissioner, that person shall notify the commissioner of forest parks and recreation. The commissioner of forest parks and recreation shall approve the withdrawal of the parcel acres of reserve forest land that are composed of significant and sensitive conditions. So say there's 30% of the parcel is significant sensitive conditions, which qualifies the parcel for reserve forest land. The person, and it's a 100-acre parcel, the person can take the 70 acres that are not sensitive and significant out without the commissioner's approval. But the commissioner needs to approve the removal of the significant and sensitive areas.
The only question I've got when it says the commissioner shall approve, I am a little about that. I think part of my problem with this is if we're going to put this in a category where we're changing the whole tenets of current use, and current use has always been in place where you kept your land open and you managed to keep your land productive. And if we're creating a new category that says it doesn't have to be managed to be productive, and we let the people into this program so they don't have to cut or manage it, and it's a truly sensitive area, I have a problem with we're going to do it for 20 years and we're just going to let them out without anybody taking a look at that. So my attempt here is to have the commissioner have the power that for those areas that are sensitive, a wetland, old growth forest, too steep. When is it ever going to not be too steep? Or if it's a wetland, and we're trying to protect it as a wetland, it should be in. And my attempt here is to have the commissioner have the ability to take a look, and if it truly is that significant, have some power or say.
What would the conditions under which the commissioner would not approve the withdrawal?
Well, at the last minute when I'm putting this together yesterday, I'm trying to create a condition whereby somebody could say, this is important land and you got a benefit for 20 years. It shouldn't come out.
I agree with you. I don't see how the language
Do
sets
you
a
want
standard for not
an-
taking it out.
Do you want an additional sentence that says if the commissioner determines that the parcel areas that are composed of significant sensitive conditions should be conserved, the commissioner shall enter into an agreement for the conservation of those lands or something?
Something like that would work for me. This was last minute.
I don't
yesterday.
envy you trying to come up with the language that I agree you're looking for. We don't know how steep it is, but we know it's slippery.
Yes. Quite frankly, if it's something that's too steep, I don't see in 20 years that it's not going to be too steep again.
10,000.
Maybe a million years, but
Yeah.
I'm not sure that you and I will be around.
Although wetlands do sometimes dry up.
Really, not that I've noticed. They might fill in a little, but.
Frog, slowly. Okay, great. So, pause. So,
And I might say, from my point of view, in the first instance,
yeah, what's the thinking?
the smaller parcels, I'm perfectly willing to accept what, the 30%, and it's the larger parcels that concern me. As I said, the tenants and current use have always been to keep land open and to promote, in the woods, forestry, and to promote agriculture, really to promote a working landscape. This is a jump away from that. And for me, I want to make sure that we don't move too quickly into this. The health of our forest products industry is important. And, there is a concern that has been raised that who's going to invest in the forest products industry here if we don't, if we move too quickly and we take pieces out of production that quickly. So this is an attempt for acreage above 100 acres to move slightly slower.
So on the first page, if there's a 100-acre parcel, this suggests that 30% shall be taken out as opposed to maybe put into the sensitive. What if there's only 15% of the 100 acres is sensitive? This appears to be an obligation that you have to take 30% out. I don't.
So
That was intended.
30% is for that land under 100 acres. I create a breakup point at 100 acres, and it's 50% for over.
but the parcel has to have 30% of the acreage needs to be comprised of those significant and sensitive areas. Vernal pools, old growth forests, steep slopes, site for threatened endangered species habitat.
So if you got 28 acres, you go out and dig 2 more acres of vernal pools, that seems silly. Why not just 28 acres?
I'm sorry.
I'm missing something here.
So remember, this is so that the whole parcel can be considered reserve forest land. So the whole parcel isn't going to be made up of significant and sensitive conditions, unless you can find something that is really just a 40-acre wetland or 40 acres of steep slope. So this allows for that entire parcel to be managed for its old growth reserve forest land characteristics. But the eligibility is 30% of that parcel has to have the significant and sensitive conditions.
Okay.
And the
Right now I understand.
So you could still enroll smaller than 30% if you're just doing an estimate, correct? That's
Right, so
20%.
that means you can't reserve the entire parcel as an ESTA. You have to have at least 20 acres that are in managed forest land on the parcel. You're going to go over 20% of ESTA on the parcel, you have to get the commissioner's approval.
So, but you can, in any case, on any piece of land, you can still have an ESTA. We aren't changing any. This is a new category.
New category, right? It's to distinguish the ESTA, which is a component of the parcel, versus reserve forest land, which is the entire parcel.
And then in order to meet this 30% threshold, can it be a combination of reserve forest land plus ESTA? Otherwise, ESTA conditions on that part.
Well, many of the ESTA conditions are the reserve forest land conditions.
Right.
Anyway, you're going to be looking at all the different conditions and then use those. So it's not that they're ESTA conditions, they're reserve forest land significantly sensitive conditions. They're both. The reserve forest land adds steep slope, adds site 4, and those are the only two that are different from the ESTA.
When you're saying site, I just want to target math, you're saying site 4,
Yes.
Yeah. Poor, okay,
Right, yeah. Well, it's kind of, they are poor.
right,
That's what they're,
right.
why they're characterized that they have a soil type that is not conducive to long-term forest management.
So, since we're in editing mode, time is short, Commissioner, you might provide testimony from your bench seat there.
However it helps.
All right, let's keep the conversation going so we understand your take on this,
Okay,
please.
so just site 4, Mike's right. Site 4 is technically it's soils that are incapable of producing 20 cubic feet per acre per year. It's a growth estimate based on soil capability. So they're just, as Mike said, they're just not conducive to growing trees really well. And so, and it's a vestige of an earlier time in current use when the use value rates were based on soil differences. And so there's just this low end, if you will, in terms of growth capacity of certain soil types that are, we call the site 1 or just bomber sites, very fertile, very productive. Site 2, site 3, and then site 4. This, and below site 3, it's just this, it's soils that don't really grow trees well. And so that's why it's in this special category of, it's kind of not worth banging your head against it.
Okay, so the 30% threshold that is cited here for 100 acres or less, that's in the current bill, correct?
No, actually, the current bill refers to, it says that it creates that there shall be a reserve forest land category, and it kind of points to the report we provided. It says it will be that or much like that, and the commissioner will create the standards. In that report, we have shown an analysis that resulted in kind of a recommendation that 30% of your enrolled acres, that would be the threshold. If you had 30%, as Mike says, then the entire parcel would be eligible for this category. And that's based on our analysis towards the goals stated, but with the sideboards of trying to limit kind of damage otherwise to the program, to keep it administratively simple, to have a minimal, sort of a de minimis fiscal impact on the ed fund in particular, with the foregone revenues and the whole time span. So we ended at 30. For those reasons, because it moved the needle of the goals, but kind of did so in this careful way. But the bill actually doesn't say that. It says there shall be this category, it'll refer to that report, and that's what's a little tricky about now putting a percentage, just in one thought, into the bill, is it wasn't structured that way. I'll defer to Mike to explain that.
So that's how use value for managed forest land has always been done in statute. There is not a lot of detail about how and what is necessary in order to qualify as managed forest land, to qualify as conserved forest land, to qualify as an ESTA.
The goals and purposes are spelled out.
Right, the goals and purposes are, but then the details, the criteria, the statute in each one of those cases says according to standards adopted by the commission. Right, and so that's what this bill does too. It's just following the statutory model for creation of categories of forest land that are being use value.
Okay, thank you. I was forgetting, I just remember from the report that we modeled different levels, and 30% was the recommendation. So I thought it was hardwired in already, but now I get it. And so then Senator Westman, you're saying move it up all the way to 50% when you're over 100 acres. And what's the thinking there?
I think not going to be kind of outlined. There is, I think we've heard from people that testified, particularly from the forest products industry, that they are worried that this will take so much out of, so quickly out of production that it will have an effect on the industry. Also, we are making a step here. We generally have never had a single category that said your piece of land does not have to be productive. The basis of current use from its very beginning have been keep land open, and if you have management plans and you manage for production, you we'll give you this tax break. We're taking a step here that is away from the traditional goals of what this is. And from my point of view, I look at this and say, I'm willing to take that step. I don't want to take it too quickly. You know, the bulk of the parcels now in the world are under 100 acres. And the movement is all towards 100 acres. I am perfectly willing to say under 100 acres, it's the 30%. It's those larger pieces that are in those larger pieces also, they can still have an estimate. And so it doesn't take away from the fact that, take away anything that we can already do. It's just moves a little slower for those larger pieces. And, but I would say, for me, I think of these two as together, because the second piece of this, if you've had the advantage of not being able, not having to manage for production, which is an intensive process that your forester, you go through with your forester when you get approved by your county forester. That takes a lot of resources and is a lot of work that gets done. And so this changes that, makes the step where you can take a whole piece and say, it's going to be reserved property. You could log it if you wanted to, but you don't have to. So it moves to a brand new category in the current use program. And with those larger pieces, I think starting out a little slower.
Well, I think the committee's interested both in supporting forests as a natural resource as well as industry. Like we've done a lot of things over the years, trying to attend to both sides. So I appreciate you bringing it up. Commissioner, is this a construct that you support or can support, or what's your position?
Thanks for the question, Mr. Chair. By the way, just for the record, Michael Snyder, Commissioner of Forest Parks and Recreation. We do have Keith Thompson, our private lands program manager, via Zoom in case we need him. Thank you, Keith. I would say I've had about 20 hours to think about this, and which I appreciate, and I understand and appreciate that this is responsive to what Senator Westman is reflecting is something that are concerns we share, frankly, and I've voiced them with you. It's like we're trying to be super careful here. There's a lot at stake. So we appreciate the thinking. It's responsive to concerns that have been raised, including some that we share, as I say. And I think we could support this. I think it's my job to point out that if you move to, this is why we did the analysis and why we landed at 30%, as I started to allude to. It's like, what are these goals? Is it, do you measurably move us towards these goals with this new subcategory? And can you do so with these sideboards, as I call them, primacy of the working lands premise, et cetera, fiscal responsibility, administrative burden. And we landed on 30 for a reason. So I need to say that. And I say, we looked at higher percentages, and when you go to 50%, we will lose eligibility. It will be restricted to parts of the state that are really driven by steep slopes. So think the Green Mountains. It will lose the ability to kind of capture and protect other places, more geographically distributed around the state, and it would reduce the number of acres significantly. So, and we can, Keith's prepared, we've built a little table here. Thanks to Keith, did a little bit of a quick analysis, and he can show you some numbers to compare. So I just want to flag that to your question, yes, we get it. We could be supportive, but know what's happened. And it's, as it's rightly put, this would be slow. but it's not nothing. That's the way I would phrase it. So I get it behind it, but I want you to be able to understand what the changes mean.
Sure.
In terms of the purposes that we've all been shooting for here. Would it be fair for Keith to just show a table right now to give you a visual real quick?
Yes, we should try.
Please do if you would.
How many of your parcels are under 100 acres versus?
I think you'll see that on the table here. And then just one note about the threshold. I think my big concern here would be, well, are we still moving the needle? Okay. Another is by creating the 2 thresholds, that's not administratively simplifying. That's actually adding complexity, which I just have to say we're already strapped, and that's for landowners, for consulting foresters, and for the county foresters. That's more kind of complexity in the 2 thresholds. So rather avoid that, but be that as it may. Keith, do you want to jump in and just sort of walk them through what you've shown here?
Yeah, I will. Thank you, everybody. My name is Keith Thompson. I'm the Private Lands Program Manager with Forest Parks and Recreation. I do have land enrolled in use value appraisal. And I pulled these tables together last night. And I think that they paint a helpful picture, but an incomplete picture. And I'll get to that in a moment. The top table, I was only able to do this analysis on the UVA enrolled parcels. It's a separate analysis for the potentially eligible parcels that are discussed in the report. But I think that the trends would likely follow suit in that pool of eligible parcels. But looking at UVA enrolled parcels, the current proposal has 137,891 acres in parcels under 100 acres. That's comprised by 2,816 parcels based on the model. And for parcels over 100 acres, there are 492,000 acres comprised by about 1,500 parcels that could be eligible based on the model. So in total, among UVA, currently enrolled UVA parcels with forest land enrolled, there are 630,000 acres that would be eligible among 4,300 parcels approximately. So that's the current proposal.
Okay, so Mr. Thompson, the 629,899, that's total acres, but that doesn't imply that doesn't mean that all those acres are, right, all those parcels could be eligible for the reserve forest land, right? I mean, have you identified characteristics on them that
So
eligibility?
these 600, so there are 2 million acres enrolled in the forest land program right now. Under the current approach, of those 2 million acres, 630,000 acres could be eligible in their entirety for enrollment in reserve forest land. Of those 630,000 acres, some proportion are comprised by significant and sensitive conditions. I don't have it right in front of me, but I think it's somewhere less than 300,000 acres, but near that mark are comprised by significant or sensitive conditions. Those numbers are in the report at the end.
Okay.
So
Yeah, just UVA enrolled, but as Keith says, probably a reasonable proxy in terms of trend for the others.
So if we move to the approach that's being considered here, and just want to confirm that the 30% significant sensitive threshold for establishing eligibility would remain the same for parcels less than 100 acres. And if that's the case, then the total acres and parcels eligible in that category are static. They remain unchanged. And so the top row of this little table tracks with the top row of the first table. The major change is where we get parcels above 100 acres. And we change the threshold to 50% of that parcel needing to be in significant and sensitive conditions to establish eligibility. When we make that change, there are now 147,000 acres that would be eligible among parcels greater than 100 acres, and 431 parcels that would become eligible. So among parcels that are greater than 100 acres, it's a 70% reduction in total acres and a 72% reduction in total parcels. Overall, it's a 55% reduction in total acres eligible, moving us from about 630,000 to 285,000 acres eligible. And it's a 25% reduction in total parcels eligible, with the vast majority of the parcels eligible being the smaller parcels less than 100 acres.
So
And the bottom line, revised acres, 284. I'm just trying to check in, if I'm remembering right, to bring us from the current 1 to 2% old growth forest to the 9% in the design, we needed something like 219,000 additional acres. Is that right?
That it is close to that, based on current constraints on management of land. I think there would need to be another 200 some odd thousand acres on track to become old forest to meet the target. What these tables don't illustrate is the pattern and geographic distribution of the old forest, or of the reserve forest land. And so, as Commissioner Snyder mentioned before, the balancing act to ensure, and this was the primary objective of the strategy, was to ensure that the working lands elements of the UVA program remain intact, while also achieving or making significant contributions towards the old forest targets. And we took a lot of heat in the process of developing those, for concerns that this approach of establishing eligibility based on significant and sensitive conditions was really going to be biased to certain geographies, certain parts of the states, and in doing so would not get the distribution across the state. And basically, the expectation, if we're going to achieve the old forest goal, old forest needs to be represented among all of the matrix forests in large blocks. Patch sizes outlined in VCD, the ideal is about 4,000 acres. To achieve that requires the entirety of parcels to be eligible. And so that's why the 30% was used at that time. If it were to move to 50%, we can see here that the number of large parcels is reduced, and it's likely that it would be more biased to certain regions, and that would need to be a consideration.
Hey, thank you. These guys have to move really quickly, so that's very concise and I hope helpful for the committee. And so what I would summarize is, okay, you've got a sort of a sober look at what it does. It still moves us, and in that way, this is a big change. We recognize that, and so support any such movement. Just wanted you to be eyes wide open of what the effect would be. Last point, just to make on this, is that in a sort of, I'm sure, unintended way, it incentivizes the development of, or the creation of smaller parcels, which I think we've all kind of struggled with. Is you have more options as a landowner with less than 100 acres than you would with more. That's a kind of a weird incentive to create smaller parcels. And just another caution, just be aware, because I think we've all worked against that. Senator Weston in particular has made it very clear. They're pointing out this trend towards smaller parcels in UVA, per acre administrative costs are higher, et cetera. And to Keith's point, this is about the functional landscape. We need to have that distribution. I just wanted you eyes wide open on what the effect would be. It's still moving in a positive direction. Frankly, if it brought more people in support, that would be a good thing.
So thank you. Let's pause for a moment, and I'd just like to ask for all due respect, brief remarks from other guests in the room. So Mr. Feil and Mr. Larson, do you have anything you want to share with us? So Mr. Feil, I'm looking at in front of you. So do you have something you want to say about this proposed movement?
Sure. Thank you for the opportunity. I can be brief. Jamie Feil, a general counsel with Vermont Natural Resources Council. I think the last point that Commissioner Snyder made is really important. We collectively have been concerned about this trend that we're moving towards smaller and smaller parcels and what that means for our forest, our rural land base, maintaining a resilient Vermont. And so I think one of the attractive points of this proposal was that we're trying to provide tools for landowners, especially landowners who have larger parcels, to keep them intact, not to have an incentive potentially to subdivide and have smaller parcels that would meet this 30% threshold. And the real hit on the numbers, as Keith showed, was a 72% reduction of parcels in the larger acreage. And those are the ones that I think we would actually want to be focusing on in particular, and making it more amenable for them to enroll. I think as we look at the overall amount of acres that could come in, that's at the highest cap if everybody available. But I think to make this successful and at least try and meet the Vermont Conservation Design targets, you need to have a pool of land that then allows a smaller amount to come in. We're not going to come close to those caps. This is a whole process that people have to undertake, and they may not even want to go in this direction. They may be perfectly fine in the management status they are, but what about for the landowners that are not enrolled in the program? So just a couple of very quick things. They're not in the program now. We should find ways to bring them in to maintain intact forests. So I mentioned a concern over creating small isolated patches of old forests distributed in very random haphazard ways without looking at the integrity of Vermont conservation design. Concerned landowners will subdivide to meet this threshold. I've already mentioned it severely curtails. I mean, if the idea is to really limit the amount of land available, this amendment would do that. The other thing that I wanted to mention is that there's no precedent for the commissioner to decide if land can come in or out of the program. There's always been the desire to maintain that flexibility. Having said that, there have been attempts over the years to look at parking issue and to strengthen that. I think it really makes sense, as I read in the proposed amendment that Michael Grady had posted today, to look at ways to create incentives for landowners to do long-term enrollment in this category. That could be, is there a tool for easements to play a role? Is there some look at the lien, but to just give the commissioner carte blanche decision to say you have to stay in the program? There's no precedent for that right now. And it's almost like we're saying you have the most sensitive features. Therefore, we're almost, I would say it needs to be more of an incentive-based approach than it's almost like a punitive to a landowner who's actually trying to do right by these resources. The last thing I guess I want to say is that there is a category right now in current use that does value having land that's not available for harvesting, but that has other functions and values. It's the conservation program within current use, and qualified nonprofits enroll their land and manage it, and under a management plan, and that is valued. That is valued as forest land that's contributing to the state. I would say it's defined as productive in different terms than being harvested, but it is productive for a lot of ecological values and functions. And I would say, I would hope that there's room in this current use program with that foundation to say that there are different ways to look at how we consider forest land to be productive and to try and have mutual goals to keep those lands intact, first and foremost for forest functions, while looking at how to maintain the viability of the program for working forests, which I agree is a strong principle. But I think the proposal that came over from the House and as defined by the commissioner in the report is a modest one, but a good one. So I'm sorry if I went on a little bit longer than I intended, but I guess we don't support the amendment.
Chair, before you move to Mr. Larson, just note, I did not speak to the second instance of amendment. I was, when you asked, I thought I was only referring to the first. I can speak to it later if you want. Okay, just, I've not spoken to the second instance.
Thank you. Mr. Larson.
Good morning. I'm Ed Larson, lobbyist for the Vermont Forest Products Association. And thank you very much for the opportunity to chime in. Mr. Westman's, Senator Westman's proposal definitely moves in a better direction. But keep in mind the underlying precedents in this bill bumps up against a very important principle we have, that land that is suitable for managing timber should be enrolled in the current use program as productive. So it doesn't change that, but it does move in a better direction. Concerned that the gatekeeper approach is interesting, but again, I think Jamie's right. It does establish a different precedence. Portability to us is very important, to be able to move into an S and out, to be able to move into ag use and out, and back into forestry. All that enables landowners to make good choices and do what's best for them and for their land. So I'll hold to that if I can. What worries me the most is, what happens next. Mr. Feidel's testimony last week was quite startling at the very end when he said he wants to help those who don't like this bill because it's too narrow. That there are people that just want to be able to roll in this program and get this tax break and not have to have a forever wild category. And that's the next step we see coming. So that's why this bill is. I cannot go back to my members and say we're going to support this bill, even though it's changed in the right direction.
Thank you. I mean, so every taxpayer at the state funds the program. And so I think to me, it's legitimate that every taxpayer in the state might look to the program to provide different sorts of benefits. It has supported for decades and will continue to support the wood products industry. But for those who feel like the greatest value of forest for them is air, water, habitat, etc., it seems like I'm sensitive to the fact that others are investing, but not gaining a particular return that way. So,
Mr. Chairman, we don't disagree with some of the schools. We just don't think using a tax program to try to get there is the right way to do it.
So one more, Mr. Fidel, I think I want to check back in with Senator Westman.
Yeah, I think this is just a really important point, so it's not misinterpreted to Mr. Larson's point about something that I testified on. The point I was trying to make was that we've heard from landowners who will not be able to qualify under this proposal. But let's say they have a permanent conservation easement on their land, but they don't get the tax treatment through current use. So they're harboring a much higher tax load to carry that land, even though they've conserved it. The point I was trying to make is we'd like to look at policies, tax policies. I wasn't suggesting take this proposal and then open the barn door wide open in the future for more landowners. I was trying to say we still need to look at tax policy options for landowners who are doing the right thing by maintaining their undeveloped land, but still have a higher carrying cost. And so it was a nod to that. I wasn't trying to suggest moving in the direction that I think Mr. Larson had interpreted it. And that's just an important clarification I appreciate being able to make.
Senator Weston, so now we've had the discussion, you and I talked about this some, but we didn't have the benefit of everyone. So there's a discussion which maybe you want to consider. I'm not trying to talk you in it, but I just want to check. Does the discussion make you want to stick with the proposal as drafted or modify it, or?
I certainly want to take a step. I think that the attempt here was to take a less aggressive step in the first one. I completely disagree. If a piece of land is significant, if it is sloped, if it's a vernal pool, if it is a wetland, that's not going to change. And having a check back to someone to take a look at that. If you have you have 1,000-acre piece, you have a significant feature on that land that led in. You can take under the second half of the amendment any of the rest of that land that's regular forest land in and out. It's only the portion that is steep, that is has some significance to it, that I'm saying there ought to be a check back for someone to take a look at this. We are giving a benefit. and how fast we want to move with resources to protect that is, to me, I would rather go slower in, as we enroll people. You know, very well, you know, this could be expanded in a little while. I'm willing to talk about what the tenets of that. I would much rather go a little slower in the front, but that second piece, I think if it's a significant piece of land for all the reasons we talked about, and we've given a benefit, there ought to be somebody to just look at it and say, hey, this fits or it doesn't.
Mr. Snyder, Commissioner Snyder.
Thanks, Mr. Chair. I guess I would like to comment on the second instance. This is what Senator Westman's referring to, and I'd offer this with hopes of being helpful. In fact, I was surprised to read the words withdraw land from use value appraisal, because I thought it was get the commissioner's approval to move out of this subcategory. Okay, and perhaps that could be a helpful sort of hybrid here, is that it's not out of the program, because I think Jamie and Ed, Mr. Feil and Mr. Larson are absolutely correct. That's never happened. That doesn't exist. This would be a major change, but perhaps some semblance of permanence by saying you can't move out of this. Once in eligible parcels that go into this category, they cannot come out without the commissioner's approval. And maybe that solves the shall thing too, because that is weird to say that he shall approve. But as opposed to coming out of the program, what do we do with the lien and all of that? Perhaps it could be just more of a gatekeeper function on the enrollment in the subcategory for this protection.
That's absolutely okay.
Okay with that?
Yeah, absolutely.
No problem solved.
Okay. So that's what we like.
If it's an old growth forest and it's in, and someone pulls it out and cuts it, what if we spend decades protecting it?
And just one last comment, just when we appreciate the people tying to conservation design and the targets, just know, Keith would say this as well, this proposal from the start acknowledged that it could not alone, would not meet those goals entirely. So it's never been part of this plan, is that this would get us to that 9% for old forest, for example. It would move us significantly toward it. And it was a recognition that we need more than current use to get there. So just so you know, it's not like this would undermine that, because we were never getting to full goals through this. This was a big step towards those goals.
I might say, I'd be happy to sit down.
I'm just trying to clarify what the language would say. Is it an owner of eligible land, enrolled as reserve forest land, who wishes to change the category of enrollment of the parcel, needs to notify you?
Well, this is where it does get tricky. And I think what Senator West was talking about is, given that this 50 or 30% would trigger the whole parcel, but it's based on those features. So I think the goal would be to have some gatekeeper function on the enrollment in the subcategory of those sensitive and significant places, not the entire parcel.
That's great.
He's saying you could come out of the program for, those acres, but the areas that are sensitive and significant need that longer term protection. So I don't know.
So
Mechanically that can work, Mike, but that's the idea.
So
That's
again,
the idea.
if the reserve forest land owner wants to change the category, they can't change the acres that are sensitive and significant, or they need to notify you.
Cannot do it without approval is I think what the goal is. Notify and then be
Notify. There needs to be some look at just those that are the significant acres, not the rest. If they want to move the rest of the forest land, fine.
So then it's become an ESTA?
Right, I think that's kind of the idea is, but not all of them would actually technically qualify as estes right now, as defined. Right,
That's Steve Armstrong.
right.
So I would say that we're making some progress, but we're not ready to, we need time outside of the committee for more discussion, right, as well as sorry, Okay,
I'm a half an hour late for the meeting.
okay, so thank you for hanging in there. So Mr. Begich, on this amendment, do you have enough clarity to be able to draft at this point?
I think so. I'm gonna want to run it by the commissioner, maybe other interested parties, but.
Right. So, yeah, I mean, I guess I have a question based on what we were hearing about an unintended consequence in terms of making it attractive to move into smaller parcels. If I sort of thought this, now that I've heard testimony, there's a part of me that might consider flipping those numbers. That 50 would be for under 100 and 30 would be for over. So that's a slightly disconcerting thing for me to see such a major change. You know, like, wait, you can stand that structure on its head. It might make more sense in terms of enrollment. It'd be interesting to look at the impact. Mr. Thompson's table.
We
I
will
hate to
jump
say
on that.
that, because I know that's not like, oh, just change the spreadsheet.
We'll speaking for Keith, thanks Keith, we'll do our very best this morning to jump right on that and see if we could give you some.
It just strikes me that, you know, there's some logic to the argument. There's been an ongoing concern about what's driving things to smaller parcels, and incentivizing them unintentionally seems maybe not something we would want to avoid.
We'll report back as quickly as possible.
Okay, thanks. There is another instance of amendment, if we could go on to the second one, which is a lot shorter.
So yes, in section 3, no, actually in section 4, subdivision 3 of the report.
Is this on your website?
It's not.
This one is. So in section 4, there's a report on enrollment of reserve forest land from the commissioner that's due on the report January 15, 2026. Among the things that he is reporting on is a summary of how enrollment of managed forest land in UVA has changed since passage of this act, the number of persons enrolling in the use value appraisal program that's reserve forest land, and there's a kind of a catch-all, any other information that the commissioner determines relevant, the ongoing enrollment of reserve forest land in use value, and then the amendment would say, including any relevant information regarding any impacts to the overall managed forest land category.
All right, thank you. So does anyone, so the point was that the reports that you get would respond, we would be responsive to the concern that there will be impact with managed forest land. And so let's put that as an explicit element into the report, so that we can observe what's happening. And are we in the section, I just want to check on the frequency of this information. Is this part of the annual PVR, FPR report to the legislature?
No.
Okay. So
This is the 4-year report.
26, right?
right. So one thought that I discussed with folks is the idea of having a reporting mechanism that lets us monitor more closely changes, so that if someone said, you know what, the uptake rate is double what we thought, we want to tap the brakes on the program by making a statutory adjustment, that we would see it sooner rather than 2026. So I don't want to be duplicating reports, but don't we already have an annual SPR, PVR report, combination on use values? So I'm wondering about the possibility of in that report to add this reporting requirement, so that it's, yes, fine, put it in the 2026 report, but in more reports, keep an eye on this as well. That way, using an existing report or just adding criteria for report. If we get added there as well. There was also, along the same lines, I worked with Mr. Feil to try to enhance further the kind of reporting out, and the language offered was that we have a new subdivision in this 2026 report that includes, quote, recommendations on how to promote the long-term, and I will give you this in Mr. O'Grady, if you don't have it yet. How to promote the long-term enrollment of land in reserve fan forest land category to obtain old forest conditions. So that would be a second explicit call out on it may not, sorry, so just that it calls out explicitly what's going on. You get the report on it. That's it for me. I was just trying to think of having more reporting, making any kind of impact more visible so everyone could see it happening sooner than a 2026 report.
Yeah, we've been, Mr. Chair, several concerns of the unpredictability of what's going to happen. And it would be when they're doing their annual review and sending the letters out there, just let us know what's happened in the last year, so we can be reassured that things are moving slowly, or be more of those things are going in a direction that was unanticipated.
Are committee members comfortable with that change in reporting, enhanced reporting? Okay, Matt,
I don't have a problem.
put it into the next amendment we see, which may include revisions to Senator Westman's language so far. Okay. We'll have to schedule time to come back to this. I think we really, in terms of keeping up with the schedule in the legislature, I was hoping we were going to vote today. I'll get trying to schedule a vote tomorrow. And, as soon as we have, I would ask interested parties to meet outside of committee time to discuss it and see if we can find a consensus. I think there's, I'll speak for myself. I would like to see us recognize reserve forest land, old growth forest, and find a way to support their continued existence and its development over the next century, thinking ahead. So at the same time, we want to be prudent about how we do it and what the impact is. Mr. Snyder.
Thanks, Mr. Chair. Just to, in spirit of keeping things moving here, I'll just share for what it's worth. We would welcome the increased frequency of report back. I think it makes sense. We would accept that, no problem there. I would ask on this 1.1, line 6 refers to section 4 report on open enrollment, and it's actually ongoing enrollment, and would request that change. Open being something very different and somewhat confusing. So perhaps Mr. O'Grady had good reasons for that, so fine, but we would just catch that, suggest ongoing instead of open in that instance. And then lastly, because he has like 9 brains, it tells me he already has the numbers crunched. So if you have time, you want to give a quick snapshot of what the reversal of the 30 and 50 would look like as your last order of action here.
Like a 60-second snapshot, and then we have to keep going.
Yes, I thought you might want to see it.
Yeah, well, thanks. It's good to have a spreadsheet wizard on the team.
Walk us through it, Keith, please.
I think maybe just the bottom.
So to do this, just a moment here. Oh,
You're eating into your 60 seconds.
I know. All right, here we go. We switch it for less than 100 acres. It's a 70% reduction. If we go to 50% threshold, we get 39,000 acres are now eligible. Previously, there were 138,000. We go from 2,816 parcels to 561 parcels that would be eligible, whereas parcels greater than 100 acres remains the same. Here, the total reduction in parcels eligible is a 52% reduction. It's a much higher reduction than the other approach, but the total eligible acres is only a 16% reduction as compared to a 55% reduction. And so I think it's fair to say that the total, there would be more productive forest land that would be eligible for reserve forest land in this approach than the other approach. It would get a better distribution of old forest and a better pattern towards those targets. It's a matter of turning the knobs and what the right balancing act is for the committee.
Great, well, thanks for knocking that out. It's interesting to see, and obviously there's a lot more scrutiny. So, but thanks for jumping in and making it possible for us to see what that would do.
Do you want that change in the next amendment?
Pardon me?
Do you want that change in the next amendment?
I don't feel like I can make that recommendation on my own. We have, so to senators at the table, I'm sorry, Senator Westman has to step out for committee of conference. Does anyone wish to see that change that we just saw illustrated? Or does that seem premature?
Seems premature to me. I'd rather touch base.
Yes. So let's leave it as is. We'll have the conversations before we see an next amendment. We'll either, and I'm not assuming that amendment is adopted. I'm not, who knows where we're going to land. So thank you, Mr. O'Grady, on that. We do have another bill that we asked you to help us with, and in contrast to current use, much more discreet. We'll shift now to H482, an act relating to the Petroleum Cleanup Fund. Mr. O'Grady, if you could talk us through 482. Everyone has a copy on their seats, and I think it's maybe the shortest bill I've seen in years.
So I think many of you serve on the Petroleum Cleanup Fund Advisory Committee or have served on it. As you know, the federal and state law requires owners of Category 1 fuel tanks to maintain a financial mechanism to ensure that if there is pollution, that there are resources available to respond and clean up that pollution. When those federal requirements went into effect, originally it was difficult for the tank owners to get insurance, and so what the state did was created the Petroleum Cleanup Fund, which serves as the insurance for those Category 1 tank owners. The fund is paid for through a licensing fee of 1 cent per gallon on motor fuel and on heating fuel, and an additional petroleum tank assessment paid by each owner or operator of a Category 1 underground storage tank. Now, the money goes into a fund, and there's very specific authorized uses of the fund. The heating fuel and motor fuel dealers are fairly protective of the fund because it is their money that's going in, and it's there to serve their insurance requirements under federal and state law. One of the authorized uses of the fund is for administrative and field supervision costs incurred by the secretary in carrying out the provisions of this subchapter. But current law provides that annual disbursements from the fund shall not exceed 6% of the annual receipts to the fund. Now, as you can imagine, over COVID and with cars getting more fuel efficient, with homes getting more fuel efficient, there's less heating fuel and motor fuel being spent or purchased. So there's less receipts going into the fund, and the amount that the agency is receiving is not sufficient to cover all of its administrative and field supervision costs. So the Petroleum Cleanup Advisory Committee has voted to approve an increase in a maximum amount of the annual receipts to the fund that can be used by the agency for their administrative and field supervision costs. And that is what this bill does. It increases the maximum from 6 to 10% of the annual receipts to the fund.
Okay. So just to make sure I keep track that the assessment. Can you tell me again, I'm sorry, the name of the fee assessed that goes to this fund is what? Is it like-
There's a hold on. There's a tax and then there's an assessment.
Right,
The tax is 1 cent per gallon on motor, fuel, and heating. And the assessment is, I'm trying to find that. It's on each category 1 tank. How's that section?
11,000 gallons tank and associated piping.
Pardon me?
Is it 11,000 gallons of contents plus associated piping?
and that's being paid by the owner of
The
a
owner
service
of
station.
the tank.
Owner of the tank.
Right, so here's the assessment. Each owner of a category 1 tank used for storage petroleum products shall annually remit to the secretary $100 for double wall tank system, $250 for combination tank system if the single wall tank is in line, $500 for all other combination tank systems, and $1,000 for single wall tank system, which are all deposited in the petroleum cleanup fund. For retail, that can go on if you would.
No, that's okay. So there's basically a fund composed of the assessments on tanks plus the 1 cent a gallon on motor and heating fuel.
Yeah.
And the net pattern is, the trend is declining overall gross sales across the categories. So there's less money in the fund. Therefore, to administer the program, they need a higher percentage of the fund allowed to be carried forward the administrative costs, which probably aren't declining, maybe even increasing. Yeah. So any committee discussion?
Yes, what's the waiting list on getting the services of the cleanup?
Well,
You wouldn't know that. That would be
right, I mean,
Center Campion.
they do have the annual petroleum cleanup fund report. It does give all the details on the number of responses, the number of tanks it's financed replacement of, any spills that required additional response. That is all in the annual report, and you know you've been on them.
Are senators feeling ready to vote?
Just about,
Senator McCormick?
the 6% was original, that was to protect the solvency of the fund.
Yes, I mean, it's to tamp down on costs.
Does the 10% still maintain the solvency of the fund?
Yes, the fund, and I don't have the report with me, but the fund is fairly solvent right now. It's not in the type of distress it's been previously. It's doing okay.
I move, you looking for a motion?
Yes, sir.
Yeah, I move that we advance this bill. Which is to say H482,
So,
as passed by the House.
so, motion to report favorably H482 as passed by the House. You played this role in the other committee. Our clerk has stepped out of the room. Would you be willing to call the roll, please? We'll leave the vote open for Senator Westman. Yeah, we'll be back. Unless you're
Senator
not,
McCormick.
Yes.
Senator McDonald votes yes.
Yeah.
Senator Ray.
yes.
Senator Westman. The Windsor, it's open for those guys and all, those senators, and I'll fill the paperwork out.
Or just an FYI, it will go to appropriations.
Okay, so, I mean, it's part of what I'd like to see about labor. Okay, thank you very much for stating. I'll check back in with you on the 4th Street, on 695.
I think so, and hopefully I can get that amendment done quickly and get it out to the commissioner, Mr. Feil, Mr. Larkin, and they can provide it.
Okay.
And the committee as a whole, I would expect some Senator Washington's investment in that.
Great, thank you for your help on that. With that, we have 11 more minutes, and that might be enough to finish our work on 518. So we turn to Bill H518, and we
Senator Ray, H411, the amendment that Senator Benning requested,
yes.
I sent that to you on Friday, because it's in your name, not on the calendar.
Okay. So can part of the reason Ledge IT stepped in is my Ledge email stopped working on Friday.
Okay.
So I missed it. I think probably the simplest thing is, I need to ask you to do this. Can you have Tony run whatever it is, 45 copies, and I'll be bringing it forward?
I will go ask the secretary what he would prefer, if that's okay. All right.
Ms. Wasserman, thank you for coming back. So, questions, let's see. I just want to make sure we're going bill to bill to bill. Do you have any new drafting for this bill since your last visit with the committee?
No, I think, so Becky Wasserman, Legislative Council, I think when I was here last week, there were some questions that the committee wanted to follow up with on testimony about construction.
Yep.
And I believe you also received a question from Vermont League of Cities and Towns.
What was the last thing? I'm sorry.
The Vermont League of Cities and Towns requested a change.
Oh, about in terms of the amount of review necessary in order to make such a grant application. Jude, can you see if Mr. Sewell, who popped his head in and then stepped out because there were too many people in here, is still outside the door? Do you know who he is?
I think so.
Okay.
We'll go wing.
518.
And
And you have the language from the LCT? Or did you not?
I didn't.
As an amendment. Have you received a copy?
They did not, they did not propose, I mean, they said you could say something to the effect of, so I guess I have the email where they suggested some language.
So, given that that is, I believe, the only outstanding language change, and it really is still, I'd say, there's an opportunity for amendment on the floor, et cetera. It's just how municipality must prepare in order to make an application. So I would like to, the committee's comfortable not address yet another small loose thread that can be addressed subsequently, especially because the bill has to travel to other money committees. So that would leave the one other open question. Mr. Sewell, thank you for coming back. If you go, just put your name on the record so people know who you are who are listening.
Of course. For the record, my name is Brian Sewell, State Energy Program Manager with BGS.
Okay. So the one outstanding question I know of beyond any language for request by the LCT was in the event of a town making an application that of renovating an existing municipal building, they wanted to build a new municipal building. Would they be eligible to apply for a grant under this program? Not, for the energy related components of that new construction.
So also for the record, since I'm not an ARPA funds expert, and the fund has been switched to state and local fiscal recovery, we have been reading through it, and there is a possibility for some wiggle room because it does mention capital investments. I'm not 100% sure if that will include new buildings, as the date has to be anything incurred, I believe, post March 31st, 2020. For our program as it stands now for state facilities, we do look at new construction. So there is some existing work that would cover that. Our goal is to have the most flexibility possible to do the best use with these funds. So if there's a way to include it and it's a good use of the dollars for the town, we would support that. I don't know that I can say definitively, yes, it's going to be approved or not. It might be an option for the municipal revolving loan at that point if it's not covered under the ARPA fund.
So it's not a constraint of this bill or this program, it's a constraint of the funding source.
That's right.
Okay, so no language we could put in is going to affect whether it's going to be ARPA eligible or not.
That's my understanding.
I also,
Mr. Chair,
Yes.
so H518 is not using ARPA funds. It no longer proposes to use ARPA funds.
I think it's changing categories of ARPA funds.
So,
The council.
so it does, so it no longer needs to have a room in it that does, so
that's correct. It's
two
changing,
of the criteria.
it's, yeah,
What-
changing from the
there
capital
is a-
projects fund to the state and local
And
fiscal.
the existing fund, since 1st of March of 2020, Mr. Silver, since the 1st of March of 2020, that makes towns eligible for assistance in building new structures.
That's my understanding. So this would, our two categories here under the new state and local fiscal recovery would be responding to the far-reaching public health and negative economic impacts. So public sector recovery from economic impacts. And then there is the last one that mentions broadband infrastructure, if we wanted to continue with that. But it does not have the capital project fund line items that we would have to hit. So if there's a way to write our applications that allows for new construction under that second eligible bullet, then we would certainly pursue that if that was eligible for the town.
So, Mr. Chair, the town has a town garage that's sliding down the hill. They've been trying to work it to fix it for 3 years now. That the float of bonds float this summer, and one of the to get the bond loan passed, they're trying to resolve their ability to apply for it, perhaps get a grant on the dual heating of the new structure. And you are the person that they should call
Correct.
in the effort to get their ducks lined up in a row.
Correct. So we don't want them to put in a brand new facility and then have to swap out the infrastructure, a few years later. Our goal
Like
is to try.
Tractor Supply.
I do
Yeah,
think that
that's
there's,
it. Thank you. It's good to hear that we're trying to avoid that duplication. So
I do
I
think
am
there's another.
satisfied with what I have
consideration,
learned.
though.
So,
And that to use the grant funds, the building has to have an assessment done on it first. So I think that that's just the catch.
similar to the assessment that an upgrade would have, an independent assessment. You're not going to rely on the engineer, you're not going to rely on the town officials, and you're not going to rely on senators advocating on their behalf. So it's going to have to pass a separate muster.
So if I may, under an assessment, when we have a new building, one example that comes to mind recently was the state psychiatric care facility in Berlin. We audited recently because it's now 8 years old, still fairly new, but we pulled the original blower door test rating for the building, how tight is the envelope. So when a building is newly constructed, we do want to test it and sort of incorporate a lot of the elements that go into an energy audit after a building's been in existence for a while. So that, if we have the flexibility, that I think could satisfy that requirement.
So they're looking at the engineering and representation of its
Correct. Yes, sir. So what we
worthwhile
is
this, okay.
the building data.
I think the building just has to exist in order for you to do the assessment. I think one of the questions last week was, can you somehow use this program for building a new building? But I think it just has to be built before the timeline for the assessment to be done. And does that line up with your understanding of
The ARPA funding.
Yeah, so like the assessments have to be done by January 2024. So if it is
Correct.
going to be used on a new building, the new building just has to exist before that time.
Correct.
We are being summoned to the
Yes.
Senate. I don't think we're done with our discussion on this bill. We're not ready for a vote.
Okay, so I would like to know what other issues the committee has before being ready. I don't have any amendments from any other senators, so if anyone has an amendment that they would like to offer, it needs to be drafted, it needs to be on the table because we're trying to vote and we're running out of time. So discussion time is waning. Written drafted amendments are what we need. So
There's
that,
an amendment that double the amount of money that was available.
that is also, there's also talked about going from 250,000 to 500,000,
Which sort of means that it'll get gobbled up faster by bigger projects or not.
I will have a written amendment.
Okay,
Something that just brought my attention this morning.
right. And I'll ask you to have the analysis behind making a proposal.
Yes.
We'll need that. Okay.
Also, I do think that on the surface water withdrawal bill,
Yes.
that 466, that we have to do something about languishing and in agriculture for exactly the same reason that time is running out.
Right. Okay. I'll check in. There was discussion that bill might be voted out this morning from Ag. So they've had their, I hope they met this morning. They,
It did what they wanted, Michael.
well, okay, so we are adjourned and let's, I'll see you on the floor.
So I
Wait, you're not, we're still live, trying to get to that.
conversion. Senator